Okay, I completed this toe up sock to the point where I would expect to start short rowing for my heel, but I had wanted to, of course, take it off the bed first and try it on, just to see if I needed to make the foot longer before I started with the heel or whatever. When I did, one of the first things I noticed once I had it off the machine was that there is a ripple in the sides. It's there's variation in the tension along the sides of the sock. Um, would that eventually work its way out as you wore the sock? I don't know, probably. But I'm learning, right? You know, this is a new to me hobby. This is um, it's me learning how to use a knitting machine to produce items that I would wear, that I would spend money on, that I would buy if I was purchasing it. That's the level that I'm looking for. Um, Whether I'm sewing, knitting, I've just never been one of those people where I can say, hey, you know, this is wearable, it's good enough. Um, you know, maybe when I was younger, but now I'm single. My kids are grown. The only other living being in the house is my dog. I have time to pursue my hobbies to the level that I want to. So it's not good enough for me. Something else is that the drape in the center of the sock, it's not right. The tension is wrong. It's too tight. And I suspect what happened was either I had my ball or my cake wound too tight, or static was an issue that day. And I really should have stopped when I noticed that the yarn was not feeding as smoothly as it should have. I should have stopped and corrected the situation at that point, but I did not. And so this sock will be frogged, but it's not a wash. It's not. I learned that because the toe started here, and if you remember at the beginning of the video, I started off on waste yarn, and then I went to my sock yarn, and I took those, once the toe was finished, I took those live stitches and I hung them on the riverbed, and I continued with my circular knitting. And it gave me a toe I'm very happy with. I would say this is probably going to be the way I knit all of my future socks. I will do a toe up because you can't see. There's no visible seam. And on the inside, again, you can't see anything. There's no visible seam. And you can't, I guess you can feel a slight line, like very, very slight, almost unnoticeable. Now on the sides, there's a little bit of a hole. It's not huge. I will, like, that's not gonna, that on its own would not cause me to frog this sock. I would live with that. That meets my expectations. On the side, or on the inside, sorry, it does create a little tiny bit of a ridge. Whether or not that will bother me wearing it, only time will tell. But first I have to complete a pair, right? Okay, and one other thing, since I'm going to be frogging this and rewinding the ball, is when I pulled it off. So this would be the top side of the sock. This is where I started and hung it on the river. And this would be the bottom side. I definitely like this side more than I like this side for the toe. And it's a shame that all those different colors would be on the bottom of the sock. You wouldn't see them. Now, if I was continuing with this sock, I could always rehang it, and when I rehang it, turn it so that this would then be the top side. You know, that's something I could do. And I don't think it would have really any impact on how the finished item looked. But I am going to be frogging it. Now, if you notice though, on my ball of yarn, the part that, like the part of the color repeats that you see on the bottom of this sock is on the outside of this ball of yarn. So if I rewind it with this part on the inside, then I can have a toe where this is the top without having to stop and turn or try to work my heel on the ribber. So that is something I am going to do. That is something actually that I did do because I already have a second attempt at toe up sock started and knitted to the point where I am ready to start my heel. Something else I kind of want to mention, and this is not for everybody. Some people are not going to care about this, but I do. I like my socks to match. When I look down, I want to see my stripes falling in the same place on both feet. It's a quirk, but it's my quirk, and that's the way I prefer to do things. And when you buy sock yarn, like Croy sock yarn anyway, if you're making a pair of socks, you need 2 balls of yarn. 1 ball does 1 sock. And so in addition, if you want your socks to match, in addition to looking at the dye lot, you have to look at where your pattern repeats fall, or your color repeats fall on the ball of yarn. The 2 balls that are in your hand when you're in the store picking your yarn. So generally what happens for me is I pull apart the balls of yarn until I find the full color repeat. Sometimes I look online too to find how it's knitted, so because you know you'll have the same colors occur in different sequences. And yeah, and then I make sure that the beginning of my ball of yarn is as close a match as necessary to proceed knitting. And that's why, like, this sock in particular has a very long tail at the beginning of it, and that is because it actually starts, if I can find the beginning of the yarn, excuse me, it starts with some green, and then it goes to this white and gray. So I made, because when you start machine knitting, you put a loop around your the clamp that you use to clamp it to the table. And so I use a clothespin to make my loop. And what I do to make sure it's exact, or it's never going to be exact match, but to make sure it matches close enough that visually it's a match, I make my loop at a color transition. And then that way I should have 2 socks that match close enough to satisfy me. And anyway, so yeah, this is going in the frog pile, and I will be starting the heel on this second attempt. Okay, so for the heel, I've put the regular sinker plate back on the knitting bed, the knitter carriage. I've changed my Russell levers to position 1. I have both of my stitch, like patterning levers pushed back to the triangle, and I've put my stitch selector back to stockinette. and I'm going to short row the heel. I am going to go down, like I'm going to knit as many rows as it takes to get down to only 12 needles in work. So anyways, I think, yes, I've done all of my settings, and we will pull that first needle out, take up the slack, okay, and it looks like we're golden. Okay. Now, if all went well, I have a knitted heel. It will probably have a hole in it because that seems to be the biggest issue with knitted heels, is closing the hole. There's always all kinds of ways listed to do it on different YouTube videos, different blogs. It's something that I'm going to have to play with as I go along. It's not something that I expect to get perfect at this point in learning how to knit socks. Okay, so I've switched out my sinker plate again so I can attach my rubber carriage. I'm putting my Russell levers back to position 2, and then I'm going to bring my rubber bed back up, pull these needles back in line, put my yarn back in the carriage and attach them. I'm also going to set my carriage back to circular knitting settings. I still have my ribber set up to knit from right to left. I just have to make it so that the main bed carriage knits in the correct direction. Okay. I don't know if this will work, but it's worth a try. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a purl bump from there. And another one on that side. I don't know if I grabbed the right part, but anyway. I think most of the strategy that I see for avoiding having a hole in the sides of your heels, they all seem to basically revolve around filling the gap with extra yarn. Whether it's like extra loops around the needle or going along afterwards and putting and using some yarn on a darning needle to tighten it up. Okay, so okay, that worked. And that worked. I paused for a second there because I just had this horrible feeling I was going to pull the carriage across and watch all of my knitting fall to the floor. And believe me, it has happened. When I was first starting to play around with this, I didn't have my static under a very good control. And the static alone had pulled the thread right out of the knitter, the thread guide. And so I just pulled the carriage across and everything fell on the floor. So I did forget to reset my counter. So I'm not going to set it to 0. I'm going to set it to 2 because I already did 2 passes. And if my math is right, I need to do 54 rows circular or 110 on the row counter. So 110 carriage passes, 54 rows. Actually, I guess, okay, 55 rows, 110 on the 110 carriage passes. And then at that point, I am going to take it off onto circular needles, and I'm going to set this sock aside and make a second sock and bring it to the same point, and then I will knit the ribbing by hand. Okay. Yeah, everything's set up. I think I said everything that I wanted to say. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button because that does really help me out. And make sure that you get to see more of this. If you're considering getting a knitting machine, or if you have one and you haven't used it because you find it too intimidating, you can kind of stumble along through this with me, or at least maybe get inspired to try knitting a project on it.